Hey, cats and kittens. It's your buddy Dr. Big Ed, Guitar Pedal Shrink. It's early in the morning here in Nashville. Let's get going. So I want to talk to you about some pedal board tips. This is from, I don't know how many years of doing this, and obviously I'm obsessed with pedals, so you are too. What do? Let me just say that from oodles of time spent putting together pedal boards, as I'm sure you all have, I've learned a few things that will help you get to your goal quicker and possibly cause less frustration. Possibly. And here we go. My first tip is start with your drive section. Why? Because I find the biggest frustration with putting together boards is that different pedals interact with each other differently. There's a lot of reasons for that, but especially when they're from different manufacturers, different variances, different vibes, different goals. So if you start with your drive section first, because that's always the most frustrating for me, because I not only play regular electric guitar, I play lap steel, bunch of other instruments, but those lap steel and regular guitar are my main things, right? So they have quite different feels with drives. Part of that is the string distance on a lap steel from the pickup, but the pickups are usually hotter. It's fairly relative, but the frustration always is, how do I get the consistency? And then everything else down the chain after that. So before you do anything else on your board, it's my recommendation, start with your drive section. Get your drives feeling good to you, whatever drive that may be. I've got a few favorites that I have after all these years, and I'm introduced to new ones every day, but they generally have a similar responsiveness, a similar type of feel, not too spongy. I still want to have some clarity. I'm really going for the sustain and the bite without it taking your head off. That's just me. I want a drive that can go from sort of a boost to like a mid-gain, overdrivey vibe. Some people will like to go all the way into a Dumble thing. That's fine. If you look at our shootout with Blues Breaker pedals from about a week ago or something, we even threw in the Kingsley Harlot V2, which really isn't in that category, but had a similar feel to some of the others. And my buddy Gary, who you might know from previous demos that we've done from the Highline Riders band, he loved that one, loved it. That was his favorite. But for what I do, it wasn't my favorite, but I still love it. It's still a great drive. So you just got to find that pocket for you. Whatever that pocket is, start with that. My next tip is, if you use a compressor, then look to fit your compressor in. Now, that can be before the drives and fuzzes. A lot of people love that. Or it could be after your drives and fuzzes. I prefer them after. The reason is that it's a really cool sound to have compressors before, and it's somewhat quieter, right? Somewhat, depending on the compressor and the drive. But over time, as cool as that is, to have that splattiness before your fuzzes and drives, I prefer that. I want the compressor compressing after the drive, because then I get more of the natural drive feel and what the drive is actually doing rather than the compressor goosing the drive. Make sense? That's my thing. But again, a lot of people like it before. That's fine. But after you've got your drive section, figure out where you want to put your compressor. I would recommend to experiment with it. And which compressor. Now, the compressor you choose is going to have a great deal to do with the sound. A lot more than you may think, unless some of you have a lot of experience with them like myself, and you'll go, oh, no, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. So whether you're doing an 1176 style or an opto style or like, the old Ross type, they're gonna have really variable feels and responses to everything else you do. So go to your compressor, try it before, try it after, try it. If it's after, you may want to try it a little less compression than you normally would. Also, try to find the most transparent compressor. There's a lot of compressors. I love the Cali 76, 1176 ones that are out on the market. Those are great, but they're pretty squishy. They're even, if you bring in a good amount of blend, which we'll get to in a second. Whereas the opto ones, not all of them, but like, for example, the Ovnifex Smoothie, I think is one of the most transparent and most useful and dynamic ones. And I've used it before and after. Now, the blend, right? I think you want to think about a compressor with some blend, because I think you'll see a great difference between the responsiveness of the compressor, how much it's doing to your drives and fuzzes, and how much clarity you have, how much detail. That's just my recommendation. A lot of people don't like it, but I think more and more people are starting to dig on it. Get some parallel compression going. You can bring it in a little, you can bring it in a lot. I know the Cali 76 and the other one that I've used, you can put the blend all the way up, meaning you're getting 100%, but you're still getting compression, because as long as the compression is on. That's a cool sound too. So, drives, compressors. My next tip is then go directly to your reverb. Now, I'm not saying these things have to be in this order, right? Of course, but get your drive section. Most of us only have room for maybe one fuzz on a board, so I tend to go fuzz, drive, compression. But after you get your drive section together and your compressor set up to where you like it, go right to reverb. Why? Because for me personally, and this is from years and years of experience, the most frustration I get is getting that part right, the beginning of my chain, and then not being able to dial in the reverb sound I want, either on its own or in conjunction with the drive section. Everything else in between, your modulation, your delay, those I find are very, very personal preferences. But if you get your drive section solid and your reverb section together to where you're really feeling it, it's in the right space, it has the right depth and height and width that you are used to or would like to achieve, you're going to be way ahead of the game. So dial in your drives, dial in your compressor, and then find your reverb vibe, if you will, and dial that in next. For me personally, that usually involves more than one reverb, and I might sometimes use a modeling, quote unquote, device, whether that's a physical multi-effect modeler or reverbs that have apps so I can stack reverbs and delays within them. And then I might even add another one that will be on off in between. So it's not unusual for me to have 2, maybe 3 reverbs going for me to achieve that depth. If you want to hear that in action, one of the best examples just off the top of my head that I can explain is to go find my Collected Abstractions soundtrack live score to that animated film. It was at least 2 reverbs. A lot of times there was a third reverb on, and it was a dirty reverb, which is another tip of mine, to have at least one reverb be a dirty reverb. And in that case, the dirty reverb was not on all the time. But certain reverbs, and this is the trick, right? Certain reverbs, depending on what they are, and the reflections, certain reverbs give you that width, depth, and height together to make it sound like the physical space that's more three-dimensional than you would normally expect from just an off-the-shelf reverb. So, before getting too deep into that, we can talk about that another time, but get your drive section, get your compression dialed in, and then dial in your reverb sound, and it will make everything else in between 100 times easier. And if you're gonna run more than 4 or 5 buffers, if you're gonna run buffers, we don't need a buffer. The family had a lot of buffers. If you're gonna run more than 4 or 5 pedals in your chain, you wanna think about putting a buffer after your drives and compression before your modulation and delay and reverb, because it'll make a big difference. It really, really will, regardless of what cables you're using, even if you're using great cables that are super short and blah, blah, blah. So, drive section, compression section, get your reverb dialed in, and get a decent buffer to put in between there somewhere. And then what you put in with the modulation and delay and whatever else you want to put in will sound much better. All right? All right. See you next time.